Good morning from New York, and good afternoon and good evening to all of you who have joined us from other parts of the world. Welcome to our webinar on good governance of children's data. My name is Yasmina Byrne, and I'm Chief of Policy in UNICEF Office of Global Insight and Policy. Our session today will have two parts. First, we'll share key elements of our recently published Manifesto on children's data governance, and this will be presented by my colleague Emma Day. This will be followed by a panel discussion with our distinguished guest speakers, Julie Brill, Dorothy Gordon, and Rita Vanska, who will discuss the implications of good governance of children's data in different contexts and for different sectors. The panel discussion will be moderated by our old friend, Urs Garcer, who is the director of Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society at Harvard University. We also hope to have some time for questions and answers from the participants. So please use the Q&A function to post your questions to us. But before we start this session, I will show you a short message from our Executive Director, Henrietta Fore, who could not be here with us today, but who cares about this issue very deeply. Here is her welcoming message.
Good morning, and welcome to this event to discuss UNICEF's new Manifesto on Children's Data Governance. And thanks to our distinguished panelists for joining us to offer their insights on how our recommendations can be applied in different contexts. Online data is a fact of life, including for the world's youngest citizens. On the positive side, data that is ethically managed and used can help children. It can help improve learning. It can help improve their access to the care and support that they need, including health care. And it can help governments better target and shape child-focused services. But on the negative side, children's data can be used to profile and track them for marketing and advertising, including for harmful products. And it can be used to violate children's privacy and discriminate against them, often without children even being aware. As a global community, we cannot treat children's data in the same way that we treat adults' data. And that is why, for example, UNICEF takes such great care in securing data about the children that we serve, to protect them as we support them. And that is why we work with our partners to ensure that they develop and apply the same rigorous standards. But we need to do far more. We need to ensure that children's rights are protected by everyone who has control of children's data, governments and businesses alike. And that is why this meeting is so important. As you discuss these issues today with our panelists, please think about how you can help us in these three areas of need. For governments, help us develop policies and strengthen norms, standards, and principles that uphold children's rights in data use. For the private sector, help us maximize the use of data for children's benefit while acting responsibly and ethically when collecting and using children's data. And for all of us, help us identify and apply innovations that can help us. UNICEF looks forward to working with all of you to help ensure that children have access to all the benefits of the online world while being protected every step of the way. Thank you.
So this manifesto that our executive director referred to was published about a month ago. And in this report, we examine how children's data is used by various actors, how different challenges that children face can be overcome, and what can we collectively do to maximize the benefits of responsible data use. Our starting premise was that children's data are significantly different to adults' data because they are more vulnerable than adults, and depending on their age, maturity, and capacities, they're less likely than adults to understand the long-term implications of their data collection. The key message we wanted to convey through this report is that harnessing of data for social good must not be at the expense of children's privacy, protection, and well-being. Over the past year, we worked with 17 global experts, and you can see their names on this next slide. These are all the colleagues and experts that we met with in the course of 1 year to explore emerging trends and to analyze different aspects of data governance. They help us highlight a gap between the world we want for children and today's reality. Together, we laid our vision to encourage governments, businesses, and public-private welfare bodies to develop different agreements, frameworks, and mechanisms to uphold children's privacy and rights. You can find more information about the working group members and also see the background papers that they wrote that were used to inform this manifesto. They're all available on our website. So before I give a floor to my colleague Emma Day, who together with Linda Raftery and myself drafted this manifesto, we'll show you a short video that explains some of the key issues that we discussed in this document.
Even before a child is born, their data is being collected. From birth, their photos are being uploaded to the internet. That's data. They are observed through cameras and toys. That's data. As they grow older, kids learn to use mobile phones and tablets to play games and learn. That's data. Soon, kids graduate to social media and messaging apps, creating even more data points with every click. That's data. All that data is collected by tech companies big and small, and often used for their own financial benefit. Governments, too, collect information on children, from birth registration to school records. That's data. In fact, by the time a child turns 18, tens of thousands of data points have already been collected about them. Unfettered data collection can build a culture of surveillance, threatening children's privacy and freedom. Children's data may be used to manipulate their choices and behavior. Critical decisions about children's lives are often made based on their data without their participation or knowledge. Decisions like how welfare benefits should be allocated or where schools are built. These factors and decisions will not just shape a childhood, but they might follow them into adulthood. But by protecting children and their data, we can build trust that it will be used responsibly. That's why UNICEF gathered 17 leading global experts and together launched a manifesto, a set of 10 demands to protect children and their data. A manifesto that articulates a vision for a better future for children's data. A manifesto that imagines a future where data governance is designed to deliver for children. A manifesto that demands capacities and circumstances of children inform regulation. We are not powerless in the face of a flood of children's data. You can take action. Learn more about the manifesto and discover how you can build a world that's a better place for children and their data.
Hi everyone. We wrote this manifesto because, as you heard in the video you just saw, the data ecosystem today is intertwined with every aspect of a child's life. Data from children is processed by governments, companies, schools, health centres, and by humanitarian and development organisations. We believe this new data ecosystem demands a reassessment of the governance of children's data. The 10 action points we propose in the manifesto have been developed to address the systemic changes that are needed to ensure children's data is used responsibly. We envisage a world in which the benefits of children's data can be maximised to solve social problems and challenges while offering tremendous potential for innovation. But this is only possible if we put in place a robust data governance framework that minimises the risks posed to children by misuse of their data. So turning to the manifesto, the first action point says that child-centred governance means children's rights should be a specific and central element of all international, regional and national legislation related to data governance. Too often we see that these governance frameworks are designed with an adult in mind. Children's data protection and privacy regulations should apply to all public services, including those provided by the private sector and civil society organisations. And we say that a prerequisite for good children's data governance is the minimisation of state and private sector surveillance of children, as well as regulation of the use of algorithms on children. Action point 2 calls for the best interests of the child to be given greater strength and validity than any other established legal basis for data processing activities, such as consent, performance of contract, legal obligation, vital interests, or public task. And this starts with the need for a child rights impact assessment that encompasses the technology's impact across all areas of children's rights and specifically addresses data protection concerns. Action point 3. We recognise that children around the world have unique identities and their capacities evolve throughout their childhood. Children live in extremely diverse circumstances with varying degrees of parental support. Respect must be accorded to children's right to self-determination, for example, by making sure they have the right to have their data erased when they reach 18. We need to ensure that data provided by children without full understanding of the implications can't be used to create an enduring profile of the child into their adulthood. Action point 4. Currently, the onus is on the child and their advocates to show that their data rights have been breached. We'd like to see that reversed so that the responsibility is shifted to companies and government. We want to see companies producing reports about their data processing and more transparency about the measures they have in place to monitor and track children. We'd also like to see multinational companies applying the highest possible standards of child rights and data protection for children wherever they operate in the world, so that children everywhere receive the same standards of data protection. Action point 5. Collaboration with children and their communities for better data governance could involve working with regional or local government structures that allow for greater participation than national government. In order for children and their communities to participate meaningfully in data governance, they need to understand more about how data is used, its value, and the risks of its misuse. We'd like to see comprehensive digital and data literacy programs for the public, including children, as the first step in promoting participation in data governance. Action point 6. Children or their representatives should be able to call on internationally agreed norms and standards whenever violations of their data rights happen. This could be done by ensuring these norms and standards are reflected in national laws and by creating mechanisms that allow children to seek redress for data rights violations through their local and national courts, via their ombudsperson for children, or through their local data protection authority. Action point 7. Allocation of sufficient financial and human resources by governments, the private sector, and the development sector is fundamental to the incorporation of children's rights into any current or future global data governance regime. We also need funding of advocates to assist children to make complaints and obtain a remedy when things go wrong with their data. Action point 8. The need for governments to innovate is becoming a central part of public policy making, including in policies related to children's data. This can include things like regulatory sandboxes, data trusts, data intermediaries, and other creative solutions. Action point 9. Throughout this process, we identified a number of grey areas where we still need to better understand the impact on children of data processing. This includes developing a typology to explain the harms caused by breaches of children's data rights in a way that governments, the public, and children themselves can easily understand. The concept of consent that underpins so much of data processing also needs to be further developed, whether consent is being given directly by children or by their parents or caregivers. Finally, action point 10. This manifesto calls for increased collaboration between data governance actors internationally. It's crucial that this knowledge transfer is not just from the global north to the global south, but that emerging data governance regimes from all parts of the world that can be usefully applied to children are also considered in global governance regimes. This is the beginning and not the end, and we hope to see greater involvement of all actors from government, the private sector, the humanitarian and development sectors, civil society and children themselves, and from all parts of the world. Let's make sure that from now, all data governance initiatives include children's rights front and centre. With that, I'd like to now introduce you to Urs Gasser, Executive Director of the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society at Harvard University. Urs will be chairing a panel discussion with our fantastic lineup of experts on data governance. Over to you, Urs.
Thank you, Emma. I'm delighted to introduce and moderate today's panel discussion. By way of background, I've had the pleasure to serve on the Manifesto working group together with brilliant colleagues from around the globe, and would like to use the opportunity today to thank and congratulate UNICEF for the important work we're discussing here. As it was mentioned, I serve as the Executive Director of the Berkman Klein Center, and together with the Digital Asia Hub, we also had the pleasure to co-host an international expert workshop to solicit initial feedback on the draft manifesto. And above all, our youth and media team at Berkman has been collaborating with many colleagues here today and at UNICEF over the past 10 years plus to explore and support actually children's positive use of digital technologies. So given all these collaborations, it's a particular thrill and honor to be with you here today and briefly introduce to you an all-star panel. And please, I apologize already that I will keep the introductions very short. Please read up the impressive bios of our speakers on the website. First, I'd like to welcome to our virtual stage Julie Brill, who serves as Microsoft's Chief Privacy Officer and Corporate Vice President and Deputy General Counsel of Global Privacy and Regulatory Affairs. Microsoft, Julie spearheaded, among many other things, Microsoft's global adoption of the GDPR, the European Union's General Data Protection Regulation. I'm almost sure we'll refer to it in the course of our conversation. And prior to her post at Microsoft, Julie served as a commissioner of the US Federal Trade Commission and was Assistant Attorney General and Deputy Attorney General for the states of Vermont and North Carolina. Warm welcome, Julie. Our second distinguished panelist is Dorothy Gordon, the chair of the Intergovernmental Council of the UNESCO Information for All program and a board member of the UNESCO Institute for Information Technologies in Education. Dorothy works in the field of digital transformation with a focus on purpose-driven innovations. She's a global thought leader in the field of technology policy, education, and society, and, if I may add, a source of wisdom in many ways. Finally, please meet Rita Banska, a specialist at Sitra, the Finnish Innovation Fund. Warm welcome, Rita. She is an expert of learning technologies and the data economy. Her responsibility at Sitra is to raise citizens' awareness regarding the human-driven data economy and to empower citizens to manage their own data. And again, I think we'll also touch upon that important dimension in our panel discussion today. Rita also worked for many years for Nokia, where her role was actually to unlock the power of mobile technology for learning in Africa. In her academic career, she has specialized in computer science, digital learning technologies, and education. So please give a very warm welcome, a virtual welcome, at least, to our three panelists. We'll start with a few questions coming from me, and then we'll open up for discussion. So please share your questions through the Q&A function. So if I may, Julie, I'd like to throw the first popcorn over to you, metaphorically speaking. Over the past decades, we have seen an acceleration in the pace of technology development and adoption, whether we're talking about mobile technology, the Internet of Things. Now everyone is talking about AI or virtual and augmented reality. We've seen so much innovation, largely technological, but arguably also social innovation across many different spheres of lives, and importantly also among spheres of lives of increasingly digitally connected young people and children. So given your breadth of experience and perhaps from a bird's eye perspective, I was wondering whether you could share with us what are some of the main areas of opportunity, but also, of course, concern, especially when it comes to data collection and usage issues. And maybe just kind of to add one last question to that, given your role now at Microsoft, I'm also wondering whether you could share a bit what the private sector's responsibility is also at this critical moment in time. We've heard already some points made in the manifesto, and just really grateful for your perspective. So with that, over to you, Julie, for the first set of thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Urs, and thank you so much to UNICEF, first for doing this incredibly important work, and also for holding this event and inviting me and the other distinguished guests to come and speak about it. Urs, to focus on the questions that you've asked, I think it's important to place in context where we are in terms of digital transformation, and then talk about kids and how kids are becoming digitally transformed as well. You know, we have seen more digital transformation in this era than we have ever seen before. Adoption curves of digital technology they're increasing tremendously, and it's not going to slow down. So we're in a decade of transformation that is unlike any that we've seen before. And this is a trend that is affecting kids as much as anybody, if not perhaps even more than others. We've seen accelerated use of technology in schools, in gaming, and for kids in terms of their social lives, connecting with friends. Now, when you put on top of that the pandemic that we've experienced over the last 15 months, you know, the power of technology, of digital platforms, of tools were really central to a global effort to manage and recover from COVID. And frankly, to keep kids, to the extent that they were able to, connected with their teachers, connected with their classmates, and to a certain extent able to continue their education all through digital platforms. So data is going to continue to play a crucial role in the lives of children today and as we recover from the pandemic. You know, when we think about these digital technologies, you know, they can really be a great asset if they're used responsibly in the ways, some of the ways that I've described, to keep children connected and to ensure an equitable recovery, and also a recovery that protects vulnerable populations like children, as well as, you know, people of color, Black and African American people, as well as, you know, the elderly. But in particular, our focus today is on children, which are a vulnerable population. Now, we've learned that with the right kind of policies, you can use data responsibly. You can detect when kids are doing things online that could be harmful to them. You can help parents control the places that children go on the web and what they are doing and seeing. We do that through some of our technologies at Microsoft, both in terms of our gaming platforms, as well as in terms of just our browser through our family mode. But the private sector really needs to do much, much more in this space, but with respect to children in particular. Organizations like Microsoft, organizations like UNICEF, and many other governments and other organizations, we all need to come together to ensure that the right policies are in place to protect kids and to ensure that there are the right guardrails around responsible data collection and use, so that we know that these platforms, we parents, we companies, and we governments all know that the platforms that kids are using can be trusted to protect children in terms of the data collection and use. Now, there's a lot that can be done in terms of putting those guardrails in place. What UNICEF has offered up over the past weeks and what we're talking about today is a fabulous set of principles that could be placed into law, that could be placed also into the practices of individual companies and other organizations. But we do need to push to have clear guardrails in place through laws. I'll come to that in a moment. In the absence of laws, though, which is the current state that we are experiencing, at least here in the United States, and by that I mean comprehensive national laws to focus on data collection and use by the broad swath of companies in the data ecosystem. In the absence of that, companies need to step up to the plate. The private sector has a very important role to play in terms of ensuring that they are responsibly collecting data, processing data, and storing data. This means that they need to provide controls to parents, clear, actionable controls, need to be very transparent about the data that is being used, and companies need to not place all of the burden on parents and on kids, and be accountable and responsible themselves in terms of the way they set up their programs, their platforms, and their apps. So, companies can do a lot in the absence of laws, but in addition, companies and organizations like UNICEF and governments can really be vocal advocates and engaged supporters of legislation. In Europe, you've already mentioned the General Data Protection Regulation. In the United States, there has been more activity around privacy laws than I have seen in the past 3 decades, because I've been involved with respect to privacy and responsible data use for that period of time. And we're seeing more activity and energy around privacy laws now than ever. The bills that we're seeing, the conversations that are taking place, all do focus on the pillars that are required in any comprehensive data law. And many of those principles are contained also in the UNICEF's data manifesto that we're talking about today. Things like data governance and protecting children and their rights through child-centered data governance. These are things that are being discussed in Washington, D.C. These are things that are part of Europe's General Data Protection Regulation and the laws of many other jurisdictions, and it's contained in the manifesto. Shifting responsibility for data protection from children to companies and governments. Again, part of the manifesto, part of what you're seeing in some of the most important privacy laws that are under discussion in the United States, and something that you also see in terms of the global norms around the world when it comes to privacy legislation. And then the issue of collaborating with children and their communities in terms of policy building and how to appropriately manage data. Again, this is something straight out of the manifesto and something that is under active discussion in Washington and elsewhere. So we're seeing a lot of activity in the states in the United States, that is in California, in Virginia, and most recently in Colorado. We are seeing a lot of activity in Washington, D.C. Much more can be done to get over the hurdle of the differences that exist in terms of the policy proposals, but the core of what is needed, the core of what it means to have responsible data collection and use, the core of what it means to provide trusted platforms, tools, and apps for parents and kids to engage in, these are known. And these are part of the manifesto. And this is something that responsible companies need to lean into as kids and society moves out of the pandemic, but continues with our digital transformation.
Thank you, Julie. This is so helpful, the way you set the stage for this conversation. What a thoughtful opening. Really appreciated. I'm sure we'll have lots of questions in the second round. I'm personally curious whether you're optimistic that we will see comprehensive legislation here in the US at some point. But before we go there, I would like to share a question with Dorothy, if I may. I'm building actually up on some of the themes that Julie introduced. Julie mentioned some sort of policies that cut across sectors, that have a comprehensive orientation. At the same time, of course, also pointing out that when it comes to data and data usage and data and privacy attitudes, for instance, things are quite quickly contextual. And one such context that has been highlighted, especially when it comes to young people, to kids, as well as data and the private sector, is the context of education. And, I know, and as I shared in the introduction, Dorothy, you have done a lot of work in the education sector, looking both at emerging data-related challenges, but also how these challenges can be addressed. And maybe more at the local level, maybe more at the school level, or maybe at times back at the policy level that Julie was highlighting in her opening remarks. And so I was wondering whether you could offer, almost as a contextual deep dive, some of the insights, some of the issues that you have identified working within the educational sector, and again, some sort of provide a mini case study of some of the themes that Julie laid out for us so wonderfully. Over to you, Dorothy.
Thank you, Earth. First of all, I want to remind us that children really don't have a choice. In most of our countries, children are expected to go to school. That's the law. What they find in that school will depend from country to country. But what we can be sure of is within the context of the pandemic, there has been an accelerated digitalization of our school environment. And this, unfortunately, took place in such a way that many of the people who were in charge of deciding which solutions to use did not have a background which would allow them to make an assessment of what kind of data implications they were signing children up for. So you asked me to give some practical ways forward. I think that as we move forward, there's no school district and certainly no central Ministry of Education that can afford not to have on their staff people who are experts when it comes to data. And they have to have people on their staff who are able to review procurement of software contracts in such a way that they would protect children who could have their data gathered and misused. And one of the things about this report, and I really want to congratulate our colleagues at UNESCO, because I believe that it's going to help a lot of people to get a handle on the issue. One of the things that they mention in this report is the fact that we're looking at a situation where we have public-private partnerships that make use of data brokers, and no one easily has an idea of where those data brokers are sending the information that is generated from educational software. In general, I can say, after having looked at educational software for a long time, it's only now that we're waking up to how we assess educational software in terms of its impact in the classroom and beyond. You know, before it looked good, nice animation, but learning outcomes and impact, we had not figured out how to do that effectively in many cases. And so I want to also make a second suggestion, that is looking at public-private partnerships and recognizing the social implications of education for the future of any nation. I think that governments have to look very carefully at how they can stimulate their local industry to provide solutions in this area where there can be more government control of respect of data standards. This is really important because the transboundary nature of data is such that it becomes very difficult to monitor whoever is providing the solution. But at least maybe if it is more localized, or there's more emphasis on local partnership with larger multinationals, this could help. So I want us to think a little bit about the issue. If you are a child today and you are learning on a platform and you happen not to be doing too well at the moment, attention issues, all of this is collected. And I'm not saying that every platform does this, but they have the potential to do it. That means that they are able actually to perform what we call predictive analytics on your profile. And what people are afraid of is that that data will then affect your opportunities for education in certain areas. It could affect your career. It could affect your ability to get a scholarship. Who knows? And that's the problem, the lack of transparency. And so I'm very happy that we have this report, which opens things up in such a way and shows us that we have to work at 3 levels. I liked what Julie said, working with the private sector to make sure that there is better self-regulation at that level. But then we also need to work with the school systems to make sure that they have the capacities within the school system to actually monitor what's going on. And that means we will build teacher capacities as well as administrative capacities, as well as at the higher level, those in charge of procurement and the monitoring which goes on within ministries. But then perhaps most important of all is the fact that this report highlights the fact that citizens must become more knowledgeable about what's happening to their data. It doesn't matter if a child is 5 years old, they have to have some kind of information literacy information given to them so that they recognize that when they're using an application or the technology choices that they have as they play on their tablet, that those choices have some implications in terms of data. And let me close by emphasizing issues to do with language. I was so happy when I saw that highlighted in the report. People rushed to get onto platforms so that children would not be left behind during the pandemic. And even for those of us who speak English, the terms of engagement that come with software remain a deep mystery. And the permissions that we are asked to tick off, often there's really no choice that is being given. But for somebody to have to tick off on those choices when they're being presented in a language that they don't understand, that is just frightening. And so we have to make far more effort to do better education around this and to frankly make it illegal for anyone to sell any kind of software without putting in the legal, the terms of engagement, putting them in the language of the country that they are selling that software to. This is something which is a low-lying fruit that can be done tomorrow if they want. And I'll be happy to come in again later.
Thank you so much, Dorothy. Wonderful set of provocations and food for thought. And Rita, if I may, I think we stay a little bit in the context of education for the time being. I know you have done very important research, actually also looking at privacy attitudes and behaviors in schools, talking to teachers, talking to young people themselves. And so I was wondering whether you could reflect a bit on the findings from some of your survey work, but also, as I said in the introduction, you have emphasized the importance of another stakeholder group that needs to come to the table, which is everyone, every citizen, including, of course, young people themselves, so that we have the skills necessary, whether we call it data literacy or media literacy or citizen skills, to actually manage these increasingly complicated environments. And so maybe more as a descriptive matter on the one hand side, what research tells us, but then also what we can do about it in terms of citizen outreach, of thinking about the education of young people. The floor is yours. Thank you, Rita.
Thank you, Urs, and thank you, UNICEF, for this manifesto. It is really, really raising important issue. And I have to say that, Dorothy, you almost said everything what I wanted to say, but I try to look at it from a little bit different angle. We all know that these regulators and companies and education officials and other officials are very, very important when we are aiming for human-centric, fair data economy society, which the beginning of the sentence, human-centric, fair data economy, need to be our goal. And it needs to be fair for children, for young people, for citizens. But I have to say that quite often I have to raise the worry that are citizens passive targets for these regulators and officials, or should we be active players on this fair data economy? Should we make informed choices that do I use this service or this service? Which one of these is using my data more ethically? So I think that now it's time for us to activate citizens, activate children, and they can't make informed choices if they don't have knowledge, if they don't understand how this data economy works, if they don't know how can they protect their privacy. And we in Sitra, which is a Finnish Innovation Fund, we are really saying that every citizen should have basic skills in data economy. We know many societies who are really targeting their efforts that people have proper digital skills, because nobody manages in this society anymore if they don't have these digital skills. But data economy skills are part of these digital skills. But I'm quite sure that in quite few countries, school teachers do teach to their children data economy skills. And we have made several surveys in order to understand what is the level of understanding in society about data economy. We made 2 citizen surveys, the first one 2018, and then now this year, 3 years after GDPR in Europe. We also made surveys for companies because we had some similar questions for citizens and for companies in order to see is there a difference, what companies think and what are the expectations of citizens. And then we also made a teacher survey, but that teacher survey was only in Finland. Those other surveys were in 4 countries in Europe, and we had 8,000 respondents. But then we made a teacher survey in Finland in order to understand a little bit what is happening at schools on this data economy area. And I will raise some of the findings from our surveys. First of all, on the citizen survey, almost 40% of people were worried about the children's safety online. So this seemed to be common worry, not only UNICEF and we who are thinking of this, but all citizens are worried about the safety, children's safety. And if we look at these young people's answers on this one, it was even more than 40% of young people were worried of children's safety. And more than 70% of people want that services should have fair data label, so that it is easier for all of us to choose which services are using my data transparently, which services are using my data in an ethical way. But then when we ask this fair data question from companies, that would fair data label give added value to your company, only 44% of companies said that it would give added value. And if you think that it's more than 70% on citizens' part and 44 approximately on companies' part, there's quite a big gap on this one. And then more than 60% of companies says that they are doing actions in order to gain the trust of citizens. My question is, what are those actions? Because citizens are saying that they trust companies if companies are showing transparently how they are using my personal data. How many services you have been using which are clearly and transparently saying to whom they are delivering your data, to how many third parties your data is floating. I doubt that. I have never found any service which is saying it very clearly what they are doing with my data. Then also citizens are saying that they do trust companies if the terms and conditions are clear and I can easily observe them. How many terms and conditions have you read which are clear for you, clear for children, clear for young people, clear for old people, and you can observe the information which is there? So I'm asking that, what are these actions that companies are doing? Because they are not at least listening to their customers, what factors really increase the trust. Then on this teacher survey, just shortly, 85% of the teachers said that curriculum should include data economy issues. And then when we ask that, does your curriculum include any data economy issues, 72% of these teachers said that no, we don't teach at all at schools these data economy issues. And that is the reason why Sitra is now working with the Finnish Ministry of Education, and we are helping them to get these data economy issues to Finnish curriculum, and we are helping them with the content also. And then final thing, we have created this Digi profile test for all citizens. It is globally used, which is online test, and you can test how are you protecting your privacy, and then the test is giving you hints, how can you make it even better. And we were investigating the raw data of the people who have done this test, and especially our focus was young people, which means in this case, people under 20 years old. And surprisingly, even these young people are very fluent with digital technologies and using a lot of services. They do trust more to these digital service providers than any other age group. They do know the data, how data economy works, less than any other age group. And they do protect their data less than any other age group. The next age group, which was similar to these young people, was their grandparents, people more than 65 years old. So after all, young people don't have the understanding how to protect their privacy. They don't have understanding how many third parties are there who are getting their private data, and they don't care. And when we asked that how much you agree with the statement that privacy is gone and you can't do anything for that. That figure, I wrote it down, if I find it from here.
And Rita, sorry to jump in, we have to wrap up soon. So
yeah, okay.
maybe one final
sentence.
sentence.
Anyway, yeah.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And sorry for interrupting. It's very rude of me. We have so many comments and only 5 minutes for discussion. I really apologize. I hope the panelists will use the opportunity also to respond to the Q&A. I will ask a very few quick questions, trying also to merge together some of the questions from the audience. And first, Julie, there were a number of questions to you, and one in particular that I think is worth highlighting. And that is, in the world we're describing here, we see many more data sources from which data can be collected. Even like the Barbie doll is now interconnected, or toys are interconnected. On the other hand side, there is a discussion in policy circles to say, well, it's not so much the collection of data. We actually need more data to solve some of the biggest global problems. We should restrict the use of data for certain purposes. And we should also limit how data is aggregated. In which camp do you fall? Where would you say is some sort of the biggest challenge ahead? Is it a restriction in the collection, or is it restrictions on use?
It's a great question, and I think that the answer really isn't sort of one or the other. I think that we should be focused on both responsible data collection and responsible data use. I personally tend more towards the use side than just the collection side. But look, collection, a part of collection is also data minimization. When do you delete it? When do you need to retain it? So we can't forget the requirements that need to be placed around collection, minimization, and deletion. It's a very important issue, not just for privacy, but also, frankly, for data security. So I believe the data collection is an important aspect that we need to retain and continue to look at. Data use is obviously very important as well. Dorothy very helpfully mentioned the issue around data brokers and combining data, and how you get onboarding of data into sort of consumer-facing services that enrich profiles and things like that. Sometimes that can be helpful, but much, much more often it can be quite intrusive. And certainly users don't know about this, and there's a lack of transparency as well. So from my perspective, I do think we can't forget about collection, but use by companies and how individuals, especially kids, can be profiled is something that we really need to be thinking about very strongly.
Thank you, Julie. The next question I'd like to share with Dorothy, if I may, because you touched upon it, right? You described some of the challenges that we see within the education sector, where it's not only new types of technologies that are used, but also new players entering the field that were previously had nothing to do with education, which is another thing of digital transformation, that we have these blurring boundaries and kind of reconfigurations of context. And so, as you have emphasized the need for collaboration and also for bottom-up practices, I was wondering, how realistic is that if some of the players that are now coming into education, as well as in other fields, we could take medicine and so forth, have huge commercial interests, of course, right? The big platforms, we don't need to need the names, have huge commercial interests. So how much do you think can we rely on these collaborative practices of bottom-up responsible data practices, and as to what extent do we really need to have these GDPR-like laws to address some of the challenges, like predictive use of predictive algorithms, one example that you mentioned.
Yeah, predictive analytics. I did see the question on predictive analytics, and actually, because we don't have much time, let me refer the person asking it to page 19 of the manifesto, where they've gone through very systematically how different things link, how different issues link into specific articles of the Convention on Children's Rights, on Child's Rights. So dealing with that. Definitely, I would not want to go on record as imagining that bottom-up approaches are going to solve this problem alone. I'm just emphasizing that getting into antagonistic relationships is not necessarily going to help us either. So we have to look at the issues jointly, but that doesn't mean that we are absolving our governments from their responsibilities. Education is one of the most regulated areas of our lives. I mean, in some countries, certain books are not permitted. You can be fired. You can be asked to leave school, depending on your hairstyle, so or the clothes you wear. In comparison to the data issues, let's put it this way, the data issues have far more potential impact. And we have to remember that the environment that we are providing within our school systems is going to determine the kind of future that our societies will have. And the data issues are one dimension of it, but there are huge issues in relation to values, in relation to culture as well, that come from over rapid adoption of new kinds of software. I really believe in the power of the UN as a place where people can feel safe to discuss these issues openly and come to consensus. But consensus takes time, and we don't have time. So we have to act fast to educate our population so that these issues come to the fore and that our governments should take swift action. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dorothy. And speaking of no time, unfortunately, we're in a similar situation with our panel discussion here. But before giving it back to Jasmina in just a minute, Rita, I was wondering, the power of shaping the future, the reimagining the way forward in this digitally connected world, how much do you think are young people themselves actually a source of inspiration as we think both about new policies, but also curriculum design and empowerment? So in 1 minute, what's your sense? Where is the fresh thinking coming from and the new energy as well? Thank you.
I'm sure that the fresh thinking is coming from young people's part, but at this moment, they are really passive targets of this data economy. But when we open their eyes, I'm sure that they will be active and they are demanding changes.
Thank you so much. Thank you, dear panelists. We could continue for a long time. It's been a tremendous pleasure. Over to you, Jasmina, with thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Urs and panelists and all of you who have joined us today for this event, all the wonderful participants, so many really inspiring and interesting questions and comments. I think some of the questions that were addressed to UNICEF is how we're going to roll this forward. As you know, we are present in 140 countries and where we have our programming operations, and in many other countries where we work also with governments. And we hope to continue working with governments, independent data authorities and others to roll out these recommendations. But we also want to invite all of you who have been in this session and civil society organizations to reach out to us and to provide your input and comments and talk to us about how you think we can roll this out. We invite you to read the manifesto. The full document may be a little bit too long, but it has a lot of interesting examples and things that we may have not mentioned today, but as also Dorothy was pointing out, very, very rich document with a lot of things to share. And finally, I know that many people registered and many could not probably attend because of the time zones and different time zones. So please share the link that I put in a chat, but also you see it on this final slide. The webinar is also recorded and it's on YouTube channel. So for those of you who know people who would be willing to learn more about what we did and what we discussed today, please forward this and share with your colleagues and friends. And once again, thank you to our wonderful panelists, and thank you, Urs, and for being such a great moderator, Emma, for your presentation, and again to our wonderful experts who worked with us together to make this possible. Have a wonderful day.